So I'm coming to something that I think has captured everyone's imagination lately. Is your recent viral tete-a-tete with Sri Shashi Tharoor Ji, and with him on certain core inaccuracies. So it is interesting that while the non-Indic camp, speaks of the idea of India as opposed to a reality, parts of which they brush under the carpet conveniently, and parts of which they've constructed in their heads. But they bristle when the Indic side speaks of the dharmic principle.
Right.
Right. So all of this is connected to this bogey of identity politics. So in the interview, you said that identity is not the same as consciousness.
Correct.
Could you speak a little bit more elaborately on that? Because I think it's very important for people to understand this.
So identity is a legal marker on paper. So you see, this distinction comes from the literature surrounding indigeneity or indigenous groups. Okay. So when you discuss the rights of indigenous groups, or what we know as tribal groups crudely in this country, okay, the question is, do you look at it, let's say from an ethnocentric perspective and think of it as a separate race, or you ask yourself, what makes them indigenous? The state of being indigenous is indigeneity. And the state of being indigenous means you exist in a certain way, or you think in a certain way, because there is an entire way of life that supports that certain consciousness or that way of thinking. Okay. Now, if you were to simply say tribal identity, okay, fine. You come from a tribal community, then you are anglicized through your English education, and then you enter what you know as the mainstream society. Are you still tribal in consciousness or only in identity? That's the basic question. So it would mean that you come from the tribal community, but you no more share their way of thinking. Okay. So the distinction between identity and consciousness is one perhaps is traceable to lineage or birth or matters which are beyond your control, because you simply land with those factors. If you're born in a certain community, there's nothing that you can do about it. Okay. Therefore, it becomes your identity simply because you're born. But if you do not believe in that community's way of life, then despite your identity, you don't share their consciousness. Okay. So the reason why I make this point very clearly is we are a Hindu majority country in identity, not in consciousness.
Very, very true. Yes.
Okay. So when every time we say we should still draw comfort from the fact that we are 80%, we are 79%, whatever it is, I say, Arey bhai, the other side is fully conscious of its identity.
Correct. Yes.
Whereas you are not. Therefore, you are HINO, Hindu in name only.
Hindu in name only.
So therefore, it is an identity. It's a marker. It's a legal marker. It is not a consciousness marker, because you no more think like a Hindu. You're not conscious of your roots. You're no more interested in Hindu civilization interest. You no more subscribe to the Hindu way of life. So that is the distinction. Now, what is the cross-pollination effect of this? That someone could be of Christian identity but Hindu in consciousness.
But that's rare.
That's rare. So for instance, Konrad Elst, for that matter, is not a Hindu in terms of the, let's say, the lineage. Okay. Konrad Elst, Dr. Konrad Elst.
Yes.
Right? Or for the matter, David Frawley, yes. All of these people, or Michel Denino. Yes. That's why I say that just as it is possible for you to be European in mind and Hindu in name, it is possible for someone to be European in name and Hindu in mind. It works both ways. Okay. And perhaps that is the only way to protect this way of life, no? Because we have effectively given up.
We have given up. Yeah.
And therefore, Swami Vivekananda says it will come to a point where the West will start pursuing and protecting this particular knowledge structure, while you idiots will follow the Western structure. Okay.
It's happening even as
it's happening as we speak, right? So that prophetic vision, unfortunately, is coming to fruition. Okay. And therefore, this distinction is so important, because unless until you do that, you are going to alienate those people who are interested in protecting our way of life. Okay? Because dharma is about bija raksha, and that bija raksha someone has to do. You have been given the opportunity to do so as descendants of the civilization. But if you're so ungrateful, then providence and dharma will find a way of protecting itself in the right hands. Okay. So it is for you to value the lineage that you have inherited. It is a sad reality that you spew venom on it, and others are looking at it with a lot of value and respect. Okay, so that is the distinction. The second thing that I'm also trying to say is that when you look at indigeneity, the Western approach is to conflate identity with race, and therefore notions of tribe, caste, everything is about ethnocentrism. And that is precisely why they look at even Hindu nationalism through ethnocentric lens. Okay. And unfortunately for them, Savarkar's use of race in his work becomes the go-to reference to say, here is someone who propounded Hindutva, and he spoke of race, and therefore Hindutva is all about race. Okay. Now, the one thing that I wanted to point out to Shashi Tharoor, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and I just didn't want to embarrass him further, was that he said, Swami Vivekananda's Hindutva is different from Savarkar's Hindutva. Savarkar's Hindutva is ethnocentric. Swami Vivekananda never referred to race. Did you read the complete works of Swami Vivekananda? The word race and Hindu race is so constantly present in his works that I'll have to ask the simple question, have you even read one book of Swami Vivekananda to make this statement? Okay. Not to say that Swami Vivekananda also subscribed to ethnocentrism, but you have to realize that in the times that they lived in, race had become such a huge construct thanks to the colonizer. Everything is about race. Martial race is doctrine, caste is race, tribe is race, everything is race, religion is also race. White means race, Christian means white, white is race. That's the straightforward equation. It's like associative property, white equal to Christian, Christian equal to race, and that's how the whole thing comes about. So therefore, some of their statements are obviously the product of the times that they lived in. So tomorrow science will prove, and archaeology will prove, linguistics will prove, and genetics will prove that there is no such thing as Aryan invasion theory. Then what will you do about those aspects of Swami Vivekananda's discourses where he speaks of the Aryan race? Okay. So then you have to say some portions history will negate, but the spirit of what he said continues to be valid. Okay. You don't need to junk him entirely. That's not going to happen. And you shouldn't be doing that. Because as much as these were evolved beings, or at least significantly evolved beings, they are products of their time.
And the human.
So you need to take that with a huge pinch of salt. So therefore, the idea is to say, the ethnocentrism with which you look at Christianity is not the ethnocentrism with which you look at us, because our structures are based on knowledge-based structures. Okay. Assume for a moment that even there was a racial component at some point. The combination of the Guna Karma matrix was meant to effectively create a knowledge-based structure out of it, because you look at, let's say, Guna is seen as the product of the Kshetra Bija phenomenon, which is to say, what is the characteristic that someone gets as the product of the features of the mother and the father. The father is the provider of the seed, who is the Bija, and the mother is the womb, therefore she is the Kshetra. Okay, so the Kshetra Bija results in a certain Guna, but then the larger karma that you subscribe to, either as part of your collective community, or you believe that I wish to do something which the rest of the community does not do, okay, and therefore it becomes a new jati in itself, a new interpolation in itself, then that vocation slowly starts changing the feature of whatever you have inherited. Okay, so the choice that you make as an individual could be at variance with the gunas that you may have inherited or you are expected to have inherited from your parents. So what is the argument? The argument is this, to put it in legal parlance. If you come from a generation of teachers or lawyers or doctors, if you happen to be another teacher or doctor or lawyer, okay, then there is not too much to be surprised about. Okay, the presumption is that you could be another carrier of the very same knowledge tradition or vocational tradition. But it is not an irrebuttable presumption, it is a rebuttable presumption. That means you could make the departure as well. Okay, so 3 lawyers and 1 doctor, that is a possibility. Okay, so therefore, there your individual karma will choose a departure which is different from the gunas that you may have inherited in 3 generations. Okay, then you become a new jati on your own. Okay, so therefore, this complex structure where there's a constant movement, mingling, so on and so forth, across such a huge geography, as an idiot, you want to apply the simple racial filter to understand such a complex structure. The bacha is trying to effectively measure the father. You have come much after us. Your experience is so little.
Yes.
You really want to talk about us? We are much older. You have no idea how our structures have flourished, how multiple races have come here and have become part of us because of our knowledge-based approach is something that you have not understood. So I address the question of indigeneity both from a Hindu perspective as well as to repel the ethnocentric accusations that we are constantly foisted with. Okay. And that's precisely why I don't think Dr. Tharoor understood when I said that anthropology is the obsession of the European. Whereas ontology, epistemology is our obsession, which is to say metaphysics and knowledge is our obsession. Race is his obsession. I wish he had been educated on, let's say, decolonial literature. He would have understood the point better.
He should have read your book before he got there.
He actually made the point before getting on the podium. Oh, you have the advantage of having a copy of my book to read it, but I don't think I've read your book. I wanted to respond that as such a huge politician, you would have had a research team which should have done its background check on this book and who this guy is and all that. You should have come prepared. So blame your underestimation of the entire situation. I can't do anything about it.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.